will introduce us to end-to-end testing using Cypress, which I think is quite good. He's a development advocate at Upstam and former programmer analyst at the University of Missouri. I even got it right, I think. Mississippi. And a web application accessibility evangelist. And he does software instruction and presents all over the place. And if he stops, you've got to feed him coffee.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, off you go.
Perfect. So as he said, my name is Paul, and I'm a developer advocate with Upstam. If you're not familiar with us, we are a cloud application platform. We remove the complexities of cloud infrastructure management, different than Carl showed this morning in a different way. So you can stop fighting and worrying about infrastructure, instead focus on building out the next big, amazing thing. So whether it's one site or 1,000, whether it's Drupal or WordPress or Django or Strapi or whatever you need to run, you can run all of them in one central location, no matter the size. But that's not why we're here. We're here to talk about end-to-end testing, but we can also play a crucial role in your end-to-end testing. So I will warn you, I have a lot of content to cover, so we can go pretty fast. I do know it's right after lunch, you're going to be sleepy, so I'll also try to be as entertaining as possible to make sure that you don't fall asleep. But I do have some goals for us. By the end of the presentation, I'd like for you to be able to define what end-to-end testing is, be able to recall at least one benefit of adding end-to-end testing into your workflow processes. At least understand how to install, configure, set up, and write your first test using Cypress, which is a testing framework we can use, and then have a foundational base to have a good idea how to write that second, that third, and that fourth test. Now, how many of you have needed to build a new feature in WordPress or in Cypress? Right? How would you go test that the feature you just wrote is working the way you expect it to? What's that? Just shout it out, it's fine. Manually, right? You'd probably go in and you'd log in, or if it's a login feature. Log in, you would navigate to where you need to go, do something, and then verify that the application responded in the way you anticipated.
Right? Well, that's all end-to-end testing really is. It is testing the application from the user's perspective in totality. We are going to walk through the application and try to mimic a real user in a production-like environment so that we can verify that what we wrote, the application, is working the way that we anticipate. Now, it is a little bit different than other forms of automated testing. So you've probably done some unit testing if you follow a test-driven development philosophy where you write the test, then you write the code, and you're constantly running those tests, right, as you write the code to get a final pass. And so it's at the bottom of the testing pyramid because we do those locally, we do those all the time, right? We do those as we develop. From there, we move into integration testing, where we begin testing our code pieces with maybe other code pieces, or our code with third-party dependencies, or our code with external services. We do fewer of those because those take more work and effort involved to get an isolated environment where we can test those integrations. And then at the top, we do fewer end-to-end testing because they are a bit more complex. It says expensive because you often have to have a separate environment set up with a web server and a database server and Redis and whatever services you've got in order to mimic that production-like environment. And if you have a third-party service you're interacting with, if and when those third-party services change, you have to update your tests accordingly. So they're a little bit more complex, which is usually why we do a little bit fewer of those. However, they bring a massive wealth of advantages. Now, it says quality assurance. Don't think of quality assurance from a code aspect, but think of quality assurance from a user experience aspect, because we are testing the interface, we're testing the entire application in totality as the user would use it. So we can ensure with a high level of confidence when these tests pass that the user experience hasn't digressed, or we haven't introduced a bug into production that is negatively going to affect that end user. With that in mind, because we can run these things before we merge to production, there's a higher level chance that you're going to identify or find those regressions in your application that are very hard to find. Those things that simply don't surface themselves until the application is truly interacting with all the different pieces and parts in place. And if we can find them before we introduce them into production, it is far cheaper to fix them before they hit production than to have it out there interfering with your users and then trying to do a hot fix. The last is you can align these with business requirements. So if you're getting a new feature request, you can go ahead and begin to write the test to match the feature request and have the customer sign off on those. And then as you develop that code, once you get those passing, you know that you have met those business requirements. All right, now there's lots of different testing frameworks. Cypress is not the only one. There's Playwright and Puppeteer and just a bunch of them, right? Gutenberg used to use Cypress back in, I think, 2019. Then they moved to Puppeteer, which is backed by Google. I think they're now on Playwright, which is backed by Microsoft. Which one you choose is fine. The concepts, the ideas we're going to talk about go across all of them. Just the specifics and how you set up the test are going to be different. Now, I chose Cypress. As you mentioned, I worked at a university. I worked there for 21 years. I managed 400 plus WordPress websites, had to automate all of them and manage them with an incredibly small team. And so I had a real appreciation for those tools that gave you a fantastic developer experience and that I could depend on for 3 to 5, 6, 7 years, not not changing my tooling every 18 months because we simply didn't have the budget. So that's why I chose Cypress, because they have a phenomenal developer experience. Their whole philosophy is they want to get you as a developer from installation to first test as fast as possible. They want to get you into testing as quickly as they can. So it is an open source framework for end-to-end testing. It's open source with an optional SaaS product. It is different in that it uses Electron. It's an Electron app, not Selenium. So they embed your web application inside of their testing Electron app, which means it's really fast. That's why they're able to do that, set up that configuration so quickly, because you don't have to deal with Selenium and then trying to interface with different browsers. And then they offer a bunch of niceties, things like time travel and test replay, where you can go back to a test and replay it. But not just that, you can actually walk backwards and forwards in time in each of the steps and see not just how your application changes, but also how if you do any logging to the console, you can walk forward and backwards and see how those log messages change. It also offers auto waiting, so as you request a page or an endpoint or you request a DOM element, it's going to sit there and keep trying until it either times out or it finally passes. And then a very robust set of tools for controlling network traffic. So you can intercept any request to any endpoint, catch it, manipulate the data, let it go on, catch it on the way back, manipulate it, send it on, or you can catch it and then send back fake data if you have like a third-party service that doesn't have a sandbox or development area where you can actually run these tests. All right, you ready to install it? Yeah? I know you're all sleepy. There you go. I see some heads. Okay, there we go. So let's install it. As long as you have Node, it is simple as in installing an npm package. So let's go ahead and do that. So say npm install Cypress. It's going to go ahead and download its dependencies, its packages, and build out the Electron app based on your particular operating system. So that's really it. That's all you have to do to get that already installed into your workflow. The next thing we need to do is configure it. To configure it, we just open it up and it'll auto-configure itself. So let's do npx Cypress open. There it goes. It brings up that Electron app and says, hey, you don't have any configuration. Let's get that started. What do you want to do? You want to do end-to-end testing or component testing? Well, we're doing end-to-end, so let's go ahead and click that. It will go ahead then and write all the configuration files it needs in the background. So now I'm already ready to go ahead and start launching some tests. So let's say continue. It does support most browsers. The only one it seems to be still missing is Safari. But since I'm running in Chrome my presentation, I'm going to use Firefox today. So let's go ahead and bring up the testing interface in Firefox. There we go. Perfect. Now, just like with the configuration, it came up and it says, all right, you don't have any testing files. They call them spec files. You don't have any testing files, so let's go ahead and get you started. Let's create a new one. I'll go ahead and create this one as first so we can find it easy. I'll say create that file, and in the background, inside my Cypress directory, inside an end-to-end, it has created that first testing file. You're a tough audience. Like, you're like nodding, yeah, right? Like, I mean, how many other dev tools do you know that like from first install to first test, like sets it up for you that fast, right? Now it's not doing much right now, right? So I'm gonna go ahead, I'm gonna change this just so we can find it later a little easier. Let's see if I can actually grab that. I'm gonna call this home page so we can identify this. I'll save that, come back out to our testing. Let's go ahead and run that. And there we go. Now in this case, notice, where'd my mouse go? Hello. There's my mouse. Notice there's that home page descriptor that I just changed. So this is running that test we just set up. Now it's not doing a whole lot yet, right? It's just gone out to some place. So I will mention real quick that I have a production website set up for WordCamp Canada because I happen to love this little Wapoo, so I set one up. I'm also running this site locally in DDEV. Is anybody familiar with DDEV? And I know you mentioned it yesterday, Paul. Good. A couple of you know. So it's a local development environment. I happen to really like it because it doesn't just do WordPress. It can do any PHP stack. It can do Python stacks. It can do all different kinds. In addition, Upsun has an integration with it where it can read my Upsun configuration files and set up DDEV and also allow me to pull down any of my environments. So I can clone my production environment locally with all the exact parameters that I have in production so I can begin testing locally that mimics that production environment. So I've got this running. I'm going to go ahead and grab that address. And I'm going to put that into our code where we're visiting so that we can see that site live. So let's come back. Oh, and notice that it is also watching, just like any other kind of watch. It's watching our test and it's going to rerun them as soon as I make a change. So now I've got my site inside of the testing tool, and now I can begin testing my site. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to dissect some of these pieces and parts so we know exactly what I'm talking about. And come back to my presentation here. There we go. So there's our first test. Let's dissect this. That describe piece that you saw me manipulate to change the home page, it's called a describe block in Cypress. It is simply a way to categorize your tests. It takes two parameters, a title that you want to have show up in the testing tool, and then a callback function where you can put your test or further describe blocks. So you can nest describes, again, to categorize your different tests. Inside of that, I said you can put a test. So the it block is where you put your tests. It contains, again, two parameters, a title that you want to have show up for the test to describe what the test is doing, and then another callback. So if we're testing web applications, what's the first thing we probably need to do in a test?
Just a page load.
Get the page to load, right? We need to visit. So you might have noticed that we were using something called sci.visit. Sci.visit is how we instruct the testing tool to visit some endpoint or visit some web page. Now it does default to a GET request, but they've already set it up to follow redirects. It'll keep following any of those redirects until it gets to a 200 response. Once it gets to that 200 response, it'll continue to wait until the page itself fires off a load event or until it reaches some timeout. Now, if I wanted to verify that this page is correct, in other words, I definitely didn't get a white screen of death, it's not something else, what's something I could check?
Title.
The title, right? So let's go add that. Perfect, thank you. So I'm going to go and I'm going to use something, let's see if I can scroll over here a little bit. I'm going to use something called sci.get. And we're going to grab the title. Let me flip back over to my presentation and talk about sci.get. Sci.get is very similar to jQuery in that you are asking for some DOM element inside the DOM. It is going to retrieve those based on selectors very similar to jQuery, and then it's going to yield those DOMs yield those DOM elements to the next thing in the chain. Now, you can't do chained sci.gets. That's important. So it's always going to search for those DOM elements from the sci.root, which almost always is also the document root. So I can't say sci.get a div with an ID of main and then do another sci.get that looks for things inside of main. There are ways to do that, but you can't do that with this. So this is always going to start from the root. And it's also going to do that auto wait. It's going to continuously try to get this DOM element until it either exists or it times out. All right, so we've gotten the title. Now what do we need to do?
Check the letter.
Check it for the correct title, right? So in that case, we're going to use should. Should is what creates our validation or our assertions. It uses chai, which is a test-driven development, behavior-driven development, that's a long set of words, assertion library, which lets us use natural language, plain language, to describe what we're looking for. So in this case, I'll come back over and I'll say this should contain, I'll just use that one. Welcome to, I don't know what it defaulted to, but let's see. So it ran that app, and what did we get? Oops, so I point it here, point it here. Where? Oh, that's the wrong thing. What did we get? Up there next to passes, we got a what? It failed, right? Because that's not what the title is. What is the title? Oops, wrong screen. What's the title? You come back over. What's the title? WordCamp Canada, right? So let me come back in here and change that. So, whoops, too far. That's the one downside of bigger fonts is I can't type it all out. WordCamp Canada. Now, let's see what happens. And now what do I get up here? So where is it? There we go. Success. I got I'm colorblind, by the way. I think that's green. Is that a green check? We got a green check, which means then you have successfully completed your first test. Yay! Yeah, you did. That's your first test. Now, obviously, that's not the best test, right? That's not a little complex or complicated test. And I don't know about you, but the hardest part for me when learning these new tools or learning a new thing is getting it installed, getting it configured, getting it set up, and getting it to do something besides hello world, like something of value. And so I wanted to make sure you get at least to that point. And I think that's why Cypress is really good, because they've done a very good job of getting you to that first thing. Because once you've got that ingrained into your workflow with at least one test, how much easier is the second test? Yeah, that much easier, right? Because you've already got it set up, you've already got it configured, you've seen how at least some of the parts work. So let's talk about strategies for second tests. The hardest part about testing is just figuring out what to test. Like, it's a little overwhelming. You're like, I mean, what do I test? So my suggestion is the next time you find a bug in production, write down the steps that it takes to replicate the bug. Write down every little thing you gotta do. Now go fix it. Write down all the steps you're gonna take to go verify you fixed it. Make sure they're the same, and then begin creating or converting those into steps and assertions, and now you suddenly have a second test that you can run on a regular basis to ensure that never happens again. Or if you're asked to do a new feature, ask you earlier, how would you verify that feature? Well, you manually do it. Do the same thing. Write down all the little steps you take, write down how you're verifying that it's correct, convert those and add that in as a second, as part of your process, and just iterate on that just like you would with any code. I've got this at the bottom. This is kind of important, and that's test the happy paths and the unhappy paths. If you haven't heard of unhappy paths, we are thinking in terms of like testing the login form. A happy path would be a user puts in a username and password that are correct, and they get to the admin screen. That's a happy path. An unhappy path is they put in an incorrect username and password. Where do they go?
Error page.
An error page, or back to the login form with an error or something, right? So they didn't go in the correct direction, but we definitely want to make sure the application is still performing correctly, right? They put in the wrong password and still got to the admin screen. Well, that's not right. So we want to test those unhappy paths as well. Now, every test should do three things. I'm going to come back to the first one a couple of times, but that's set up the application state. You need to set up your application to be able to perform the test that you need. Then you're going to take all those little steps, all those little actions, and then you're going to make an assertion or some kind of validation. It's often referred to as arrange. So arrange your application, perform your actions, and then make assertions. Or you might see it as given, when, then. So given I'm an anonymous user, when I visit the home page, then the title should be WordCamp Canada. Number one, from this up, the setup application is important because you want to make sure that you can run all of your tests independently from each other. So one reason Paul mentioned in his talk, right? These are more complicated tests to run. They take a little bit longer to perform, so you might want to run them in parallel. So we need to be able to run any of these tests individually. The other thing is you never want a test to be dependent on a previous test, because what if that previous test passes incorrectly? In other words, your test was bad, but it passed, but the application left some state that you didn't want, and now it's going to negatively affect those downstream of those other tests. So we want to make sure we're always setting up state ahead of time before we run those tests, and that every test is siloed. Are you ready to write a second test? Yep. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Got some enthusiasm. All right, let's write a second test. I'm going to come in here. We'll create a whole brand new file. And I'll say second.sci. And in this one, I'll say describe. This will be maybe my auth tests. Auth tests. Oops. And then we gotta have a callback, which I should have just accepted, but that's all right. And then we have to do what? After describe, we have to
Visit.
before the visit, before the get, we have to do an it. We have to describe a test, right? So I'm going to say it. Let's say it can auth. And, all right. So then we have another callback. All right. Now what do we have to do? Oh, it's telling us we got to visit, right? All right. So go ahead and visit, and we'll come back just a little bit so that we can go to the login location. So we're going to test the login form. Now, before I continue, can anybody identify an issue that I have just created between these two tests? Think in terms of abstraction. Somebody said it.
Duplicated the domain?
Yeah, the URL is hard-coded, right? Yeah, and that is currently pointing to my local running instance. What if I want to run this in a development environment or a PR environment, right? So we want to make sure we're writing our test to be environmentally agnostic. It shouldn't matter where the tests are running. We want to be able to run them anywhere. So we need to talk about some configuration. Back in that configuration file that Cypress created, we have the ability to add in additional configuration values and environmental values. One of those, which is the base URL. Base URL allows you to define a URL that you want to visit, and then it will pre-pend it to any calls to sci.visit or sci.request that are relative URLs, which means then I can create my test using those relative URLs, and then it doesn't matter where I run them. I simply have to add that base URL configuration to that specific environment. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that. So come back in here, I'll open up sci.config, and I will say my base URL is going, I'll just leave it as localhost. So let's pretend everybody else in my company uses localhost. I'm the oddball on DDev. So we have to talk about environmental processing. So Cypress has done a really good job of creating a cascade. Oh, this is going to crash, by the way, because I changed it and that place does not exist. So I'm going to close out Cypress here. Sorry. There we go. And let's close Cypress. They've done a very good job of environmental variable processing with a cascading style, meaning that in Cypress config, we can define things. Then we can create a sci.m file that overrides any of those. So I could have like a local one. Then in your environment where it's running, if there are environment variables defined that start with Cypress uppercase underscore, then the variable name, it'll override any of the other two. Or when you open Cypress, you can pass in configuration values to override any of the others. Or, it's not even on the slide, you can in an individual test override any of those others. Meaning now you can set this up to run your local test. You can run them in staging, development, anywhere you need to, and be completely agnostic. So I'm going to come back in here, and I'll say, let's do an export of Cypress base URL. So I'll set mine to that DDev location, even though the configuration file is set to localhost. Now let's do npx start, or npx open, excuse me. We're doing that end-to-end testing. I'm going to do it in Firefox. Come on, Firefox. There we go. There's my second test. We'll run that. And do we get to the login page? You are a tough audience. Yeah! All right, there we go. Okay. Okay, so now that we want to test this form, what's the next thing we need to do? What's that? Put in some data, right? Yeah? So we need to put information into the username and the password. So I'm going to use what to get a DOM element. I'm going to use an ID with what function? Get, the sci.get. So notice this is your application. You can inspect it just like you could if you were running it in another browser. All right, so this one's called user login. So I'm going to come back into our test. And I will say, assume I can scroll over just a bit. I'll say sci.get. And that one was user, what was that? User login, I said? Login. Oh, darn. Don't want that, nor there. I want that. Okay. I don't want that. It keeps adding more than I want. Now, I will suggest to do a clear before you do any typing, because if you have placeholder text, if something else is still in there, we just want to clear that out. It also seems to make the typing work a little better for some weird reason. So I'm going to do a type, and I'm going to say maybe this is going to be Bob. So let's see that run. Ta-da! All right, the next thing I need to do is the password, right? So I'll do another sci.get. Sci.get. This is not user login, but I will come back and let it complete and do pass. Don't want to do a click, but let's do a clear. And we'll type. Password looks good to me. There we go. And then what's the last thing we need to do? I heard a couple things. I heard enter. I heard click. Yeah, we got options. We can do lots of things. So one thing you can do is you can use the curly braces and use a token to stand for key presses. 1, 2, 3, boom. That works. If you don't like that, we could go ahead and do a click of that other DOM element. So I could do sci.click. Let's see, I think that one is called WP submit. WP submit. And not submitty. Feel free to warn me if I mistype. And we don't want to clear a password or anything like that. We want to do a click. So let's do click. And let's run that. And ta-da! All right, good. Okay, so the next thing is I don't actually have a Bob user. I need a Bob user. So we need to talk about state. I mentioned state a couple of times. We need to manage the state of our application. In this case, I need a user in order to be able to test the functionality. There are a couple of ways that we can do this. The first is to stub out all data. It's fast, it's easy. You may have seen that fixtures directory. That's where you put all that fake data is in the fixtures. So if you see it referred to as requires fixtures, that's what that means. It's nice because we don't have to have another environment. We don't have to have a web server and a database, etc. But it's not really an end-to-end test. We're not really going to surface those odd issues unless we just stub out everything, and that's going to be complex. The second way we can manage state is like with a static user. So I could create the user and then reuse that user all the time. And that's good because it's a real end-to-end test. But it does require that I set up a second server environment with a database. I'm going to have to seed the database. I'm either going to have to export from something else and import, or have a SQL file ready to go that I can ingest. The downside, especially in something like WordPress, is as you use a user, what happens to that user? Let me rephrase that. What happens to the information surrounding that user internally? It changes, right? It stores stuff, right? And so you end up sharing that state. You have state mutations, dangling state, and so it could negatively impact or affect those other tests. So the last type is to use dynamic state, where you are going to delete the user, add the user, run your test, delete the user. You're going to dynamically create the state every time. Now that is more complex, right? Because you're going to have to do a setup and a teardown. That could be maybe you do an import of the database and then you wipe it and then do another import, however you need to do, but you're going to have to do something to like reset it. It is also going to be a little bit more slow because you're going to have to perform all those actions before you run the tests. For today, I'm going to go with number 2. I'm going to do a static user. So I'm going to tell ddev to create a new user for me. So I'm going to create a user Bobby2. So it's just ddev exec run wp, the wp CLI inside, create me a user. Come on, ddev run. There we go. So I'm going to grab that password. And then I'm going to come back into my test and I'll change this to Bobby2 and I'll change this to the password. All right, is anybody cringing? Should you be cringing? Yeah, what did I just do? I stored the password in plain text in a file. Do we want to do that? No, we don't want to do that. Okay, so what we can use instead are those environment variables. So I'm going to come back in here and come to the end of, let's see, end of there. There we go. I'm going to say, all right, I need some environment variables. Oops, back up here. So I'm going to create a couple. I'm going to create one called TU for test user because I don't want to have to type out anymore. And I'll make it Bobby. And then I'll create another one called TUP for the password. We'll call that one password. back in here, I need to close out my Cypress because we're going to have to rerun. Yes, close. Let's kill you out. And because of that processing, what can I do? Because of that environmental processing, what can I do?
Set an environment variable.
I can set environment variables, right? Now, to tell Cypress that we want to use those environment variables, I'm going to come back in here and wipe this out and say, access the Cypress application and use its environment variable and grab the environment variable it is defined for, in this case, TU. And I'll do the same thing for the password. I'll say cypress.env password, but that is going to be TUP. So if I were to run those now, those would have grabbed the ones I defined in the config. Instead, I'm going to say npx cypress open, and I'm going to say pass in the environment variables. TU is Bobby2, and the TU is a password from previous iterations. So put in the new one. Let's tell it to run. We're going to do the end-to-end test. We are going to launch Firefox. We are going to go to our second test. Second test. We're going to let it run, put in Bobby2 and the password, and ta-da! Yay! All right. Now, how do I validate? We haven't got to the validation yet. How do I validate that this is correct? What's that? Could check the URL. Downside of checking the URL is if I started from maybe a different location that redirected me there, I've got that URL parameter that sends me back somewhere else. What else can I do?
Check for a cookie.
Check for a cookie. We're going to get there. Oh, what about? Ooh, there it is. What does that say? That's the username, right? All right, so I could grab this. I could say, hey, give me that value. I'm sorry if this is too small to see, but I can grab that admin bar. So I can come back now in my test and say, all right, sci.get this value, which is pound. There we go. And that should be what? Should contain that exact same thing. So hopefully it came all the way over. Oh, no, go back. Not a value of welcome, but cypress.env tu. So let's rerun that, and what do we get? Yay! We validated that. Good? All right, we are ready then to write the next test. So let's say the next test, what we want to do is we want to, maybe they want to do they need to be able to add a custom CPT. So let me just come back over. I'm going to add a new test down here. So say it can add CPT, can add CPT. And let's do that, and let's go here. Now normally I would do sci.visit, and then maybe not that, we don't want that. Oh no. Scroll over. Let's say maybe this needs to be WP admin, edit, and then normally I'd have like the post type, to go directly, but we'll just leave it at this one. Is this going to work? Does anybody know? No. And the reason is because every test, Cypress opens up an instance of the browser in incognito, private mode, whatever. And at the end of the test, what does it do? Destroys it. So that means the second test doesn't have any authentication. So should I go back up here and copy all of this information? Oh, you know what? I forgot to change that, didn't I? Oops. Should I copy all this information and paste it down in this next test? No, what? No, I don't want to do that, right? I need to be able to reuse code, right? We should always reuse code when we can. Why are you not selecting? So let's try this again. So at least let me copy this. Instead, remember I mentioned it creates a bunch of supporting files. One of those files is a commands file, which lets you write your own commands. So I can say, all right, Cypress commands add, and I can add my own custom commands. So I could say, all right, well, let's do WP login. It takes a name that you want to use to call the function. Then what does it take probably? Everything's a callback. It just uses callbacks all the time. So now in here, I can say I want to use my code that I previously used. And if I save that and rerun my test, but wait, I forgot to add it, didn't I? Oh, let's go back. Where's my second test? Oops, I forgot to add. So let's get rid of that. Let's say sci.wp login, and let's add it into here as well. Sci.wp login. And now what happens? And we get to the edit screen. Yeah, all right. But what did I have to do in both of those?
Link them.
I'd use it again, right? And I'm still using, in that commands file, I'm still using those, not hard-coded values, but I'm still using the environment values. What if I want to test multiple users?
Parameters.
What's that?
Parameters.
Parameters, right? So I can go up here and I can say, okay, this is going to take a user and password. Then in here, oh, I don't know what I clicked on, but that's not what I wanted. In here, I can remove this, scroll over and say, no, let's use, type the username that's passed in. Take this one, and let's use the password that's passed in. Oops, hold on, let's just go this way. Type password. Then we can do our verification using that exact same username. As you're watching me here. And let's say user. And now, back in my test, then we can change that out to say Cypress. Hold on, I'm not sure what I did there. Let's come down. Cypress dot env. Oops, wrong place. tu and Cypress dot env and tup. Oops, I keep hitting the wrong keys today. tup, and then I will copy that exact same piece down to the second one. I keep hitting some extra command there. It is hard to do this when my font is so big. Goodness. Where did I put that? I'm in my commands. I want to be here. There we go. Okay, let's just do it this way. Come down here. Now, let's run those tests. 5 minutes? Oh, okay, I'm gonna have to speed up. Okay, so wouldn't it be nice if instead, so we do two things. Okay, so this, hold on, just made myself all freaked out. So I had to copy that twice, right? I had to do that 2 times. I don't want to do that. I want to be as efficient as possible. So just like WordPress, I'm gonna go ahead and cut this out. Cypress gives you hooks. One of those hooks is called a before each hook. Before each allows you to run some command before each test. So instead, I could put that there and then remove it from here. And now if I save it, my test still works. All right, so now if you have something you need to do every time, you can add it in that location so that you're not having to replicate that every time. Now, wouldn't it also be nice if instead of having to manually go to the form every time I want to run a test, wouldn't it be nice if I could simply restore a session? All right, so Cypress added that in version 13. Before that, it was really hard to do this kind of thing, but they've given us the ability to take a session, save the session data, and then recall the session data at any point. So I'll come back into my commands. I will grab all of this. I'm going to put this inside sci.session, and it takes a callback, because everything is a callback. And then I'll put that in there, and then I'm going to give it an ID of user from my function, or from my custom command up there. So now when I run this test, the first time it says, okay, I've cleared all the sessions, I need to create a Bobby session. Expand that out, there it goes. So it's going to create, it's going to go ahead and follow the process of walking through the form. But the second time we run this, it says, all right, I need a session, I'm going to restore that session. So now you don't have to actually do that. Now I'm going to speed up just a little bit because I am running out of time. I always do this. Some couple of quick best practices. If you don't need to involve Chrome or whatever browser, don't programmatically create your authentication. And I've got an example of that over here. So in here, that is not the right file. I thought it was. No, there it is. I've got that same WP login, but instead of involving Chrome and getting elements and walking through the form, instead I'm just going to do a post to WP login, passing in the values, and creating that session. So just saves you some time. One piece or one downside of using Cypress is you have to adhere to their opinionations. Is that a word? I don't think that's a word. It's an opinionated framework. There we go. So if you're a JavaScript developer, this piece is a little weird. You can't save the information that is returned from a function, from a Cypress function. You can only use a closure or what they call aliases. And so that can be a little jarring. The other thing is, as I mentioned, make sure you set the state before test begins, and then try not to use brittle selectors, meaning that IDs, classes, parent-child relationships, those can all change. So Cypress suggests data attributes with some unique value that you can set on all your elements. All right, who can define end-to-end testing? Sure, just yell it out. Anybody? Go ahead.
A way to test our application.
Yeah, testing the whole application, right? What's an advantage or a benefit of using end-to-end testing?
Reduce costs.
Reduce cost, especially if you can catch those bugs and problems before they get into production. Do you feel comfortable installing, configuring, and writing your first test when you get back? Yeah? And feel pretty good about solid foundations to write a second test? Fantastic. All right. So then I want to show you real quick in the last couple of minutes I have a real world scenario of using this in production. So as I mentioned, I do have a WordCamp Canada website that I have set up, and I also have it's on GitHub in repository. One of the nice things that I like about Cypress is they also have a GitHub action. Do I have 3 minutes left? 2 minutes? 1 minute? I have 9 minutes left? Oh, that's all right. I got 1 minute left. Okay. So they have an action. It's well documented, well supported, which means that I can just pass in the URL for any environment that I need to test and have that run as part of my CI/CD process. Upsun also has an integration with GitHub where when you create a PR, it sends us that code. We clone your production environment instantly, adding that PR code to it, and then deploy it. So that, in this case, is this piece. So you can see that this is a clone of my production site. So then back in the test, in the CI/CD process, I can pass in that URL to Cypress to run my test. So in this case, you can see that it failed. Why did it fail? Let's go look. It says I've got 4 tests passed, 1 failing. Let me hit the summary. I know I got one of them. I'm hurrying. We got 1 failure. If you integrate your Cypress testing in GitHub with the Cypress Cloud, you can go view your failed test, and they do have a free tier. So I can see down here the test that failed was the editor can log in and post, but they should also be able to delete their own post. So if I run that replay, here it goes. It looks like it was trying to find the trash can icon, and notice, oh, yep, trash is missing. So something that I've introduced has messed with the permissions in this, in whatever I was working on, and has broken the ability for a user to delete their post. And that fails out the PR, and I know, hey, I can't go ahead and merge this PR. Cool. All right, I wanted to make sure you saw that. Awesome. All right, I believe that is all the time I have, so sorry about that. I ran out. We don't have time for questions, but feel free to contact me at any point. This should be a QR code to my link tree, or there it is over there. It's just linktr.ee/Gilzo. I'm pretty much Gilzo like everywhere, and there's like 20 of us in the United States, and we're all related, so you'll probably be able to find me if you have any questions afterwards. Awesome. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.